From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla González, and this is From the South. And we have breaking news. U.S. President Donald Trump has just announced his meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the 12th of June. The meeting will take place in Singapore. Via Twitter, Trump said they will try to work towards world peace. This is the first time a sitting U.S. president will meet with a North Korean leader. Peace talks between the National Liberation Army, or ELN, and the Colombian government are currently taking place in Havana, Cuba. So far, the chief negotiator of the ELN, Pablo Beltrán, has showed his commitment to the peace negotiations and made a call for the peace accord with the FARC to be protected. Beltrán warned that a social transformation is needed in Colombia. Otherwise, he said, our guerrilla generation may disappear and new ones could come. The fifth cycle of talks is seeking a peace accord between the ELN and the government, such as the one signed by the FARC in 2016.
It is very important that we are able to agree on a ceasefire, much better than the previous one, even if it's not a final ceasefire, but at least a better one. And also we should encourage participation of Colombian society in this process, because this agenda has two main goals. The first is to design a transformation process for Colombia, and secondly, take a new step to move towards the end of the conflict.
Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos said he is positive that the talks will move forward to end the 5-decade conflict. Speaking while on an official visit to Germany, Santos said he will try to leave negotiations on the right track to enable the next Colombian president to sign a peace accord.
Okay. Tomorrow they start officially or they renew negotiations to see if we can get a ceasefire relatively soon. I think we will get it, and to see if we can get a deal with the ELN as soon as possible. I would say I won't be able to sign that deal, but I will try to leave the next president with something on the right track.
The head of Colombia's Revolutionary Alternative Forces of the Commons, the FARC party, Rodrigo Londoño, has urged former militants to refrain from violence following the murder of former leader Juan Vicente Carvajal Isidro. Londoño asked former combatants not to jeopardize the peace deal between the government and the FARC. The FARC statement said the conflict did not end, but changed its form of expression, which requires our consistent good behavior. Our strength lies in the collective. We cannot forget it. He also asked authorities to take measures to stop violence against former guerrilla members. President Nicolás Maduro continued his election campaign in the state of Yaracuy. Maduro spoke to a massive crowd where he told people he will put an end to the intensified economic war on Venezuela if re-elected on May 20th. Maduro also stated once again his plan to continue consolidating the public education system and making improvements to national health care. International observers will be in Venezuela next week to accompany the electoral process. For more on this, we have Raúl Burbano of Common Frontiers, an organization which will lead a Canadian mission of labor and ecumenical organizations in the country to participate in these elections. Hello, Raúl.
Hello.
Hello, nice to see you. So what are the main differences between the election observations in Venezuela and in other countries?
Well, I've had the opportunity to participate in elections observations in Venezuela, Bolivia, and most recently in Honduras in 2013. And I think I could say unequivocally that the electoral system in Venezuela is one of the strongest in terms of the environmental process, pre and post the elections. So it's one that's laden with transparency, participation of all the different parties. In other countries, for example, in Honduras, it was more an environment of intimidation and fear. Also, when I look at the electoral technology and system, the one in Venezuela is extremely advanced and secure. For example, there's biometric authentication of the voter, which also activates the machine. The system is auditable through all the stages, which is something that I did not see in any of the other countries that I've participated in.
But even with all these facilities, with the technology and with the support of other countries, the UNASUR or other electoral authorities or organizations, the MUD, the opposition in Venezuela, has decided to boycott the election, at least some part of the opposition. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's unfortunate because there are multiple candidates, even from other sectors of the opposition, that are participating in the elections. But I think it's really unfortunate because it is that same sector of the opposition that today is boycotting, who had been calling for the elections to be moved forward for the last couple of years. So it's a bit of a contradiction in what they're asking for. The logic, one also has two questions because the opposition continues to say that they have the majority of support to Venezuelans, yet you would think that going to elections would be, what they would want to do to show that support. Also, that opposition has been engaged for the last year and a half in negotiations with the government. And until recently, I think it was February of this year, they came to an agreement in principle for electoral norms, transparency, participation that the opposition had been asking for. And then at the last minute, they walked away. So I think it really sends a really negative signal, that the opposition sends a negative signal to Venezuelans, because from what I've seen in terms of the polls from Hinterlasses just recently, 70% of Venezuelans say they will be going to the polls to participate. So they're not giving voters in Venezuela an option, which is really unfortunate. And usually the opposition ends up losing quite a lot in the electoral process.
And even with all those numbers, we see authorities in the US and in Canada as well saying that they will not support the results of this election. Some have said that there's a fraud in these elections. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I think it's unheard of to condemn elections prior to the electoral process. Usually you go through the electoral process and then you can have your critiques of it. And also, I think it's a blatant violation of sovereignty of any nation to dictate when that country and how that country should undertake elections. We have to keep in mind that Venezuela has a strong history of democratic participation. They've undertaken 25 electoral processes over the last 19, 20 years. That by any standards is impressive. So I think that countries like Canada and the US are following the continued line of previous governments, which is of trying to marginalize Venezuela. Obviously, the Trump administration has taken it further with sanctions and openly calling for regime change, which is extremely concerning for any democracy in the country or in the region. Sorry. I think Canada promotes itself as a peace builder, as a supporter of dialogue and democracy. But unfortunately, what we see is the opposite. We see Canada participating with other countries in the region, for example, Brazil, Honduras, Mexico, whose electoral systems are extremely questionable and whose violations of human and labor rights are, unheard of or very bad. And yet they're working with those countries to try to bring democratic norms to Venezuela. So, there is a lot of contradictions in the current policies of the administrations, and I believe that are heading in the wrong direction.
Thank you very much, Raúl, for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Raúl Burbano from Canada. So, Ecuadorian former Minister Carlos Pareja Llanuselli has been sentenced to 10 years in prison under corruption charges. Pareja Llanuselli was accused of illicit enrichment while he was Minister of Oil under the past administration. The former Ecuadorian president already distanced himself from the former minister after the case broke out. This is the third sentence linked to corruption cases to state oil company Petroecuador. And Ecuador's president, the current president, Lenín Moreno, is evaluating his cabinet's ministers, their performance and their political stance as he begins his second year in office. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, reports.
President Lenín Moreno is about to celebrate his first anniversary as president. In his first year, he has replaced a number of ministers and high government officials. Now he has asked for all of his cabinet ministers to resign as he evaluates them ahead of his second year.
Regardless of this ritual, there is something else going on. It is not just about the first anniversary of this government. It's about the government's position being rearranged. The change of the cabinet not only means putting new people together, it's also about making a political shift.
Reaction on the streets to his decision are mixed.
Lenín Moreno's government has focused on reaching out the majority of political actors in the country, which is different from the previous government.
The call for the cabinet to resign showed that the president intends to implement some significant changes.
In a press conference, the president's secretary, Juan Sebastián Roldán, explained how the evaluation will work.
This is an ongoing evaluation, a technical evaluation, where ministries are being considered. This evaluation has been scheduled since the beginning of the year by the Secretary for Planning. There's also going to be a political evaluation, and from there, the President is going to make decisions.
The president's secretary also said for now no decisions has been taken about who will form the new cabinet that will be revealed on May 24. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Quito, Ecuador.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
That's why today we call on Maduro and his regime, suspend this sham election, hold real elections, give the people of Venezuela real choices, because the Venezuelan people deserve to live in democracy once again.
We hope our friends in the EU will soon follow the United States, Canada, and many Latin American nations in sanctioning the Maduro regime. We need everybody involved.
We've already imposed strict financial sanctions on more than 50 current and former senior Venezuelan officials. We cut off the so-called petro from the United States financial system.
¿Quién elige al presidente de Venezuela? Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Julio Borges. El presidente de Venezuela lo elige el soberano pueblo de Venezuela en voto directo secreto.
Welcome back. Brazil police are saying a Rio de Janeiro council member has been linked to the murder of fellow member and activist Mariel Franco. According to preliminary investigations, the council member is linked to criminal groups operating in the city. A witness said the councilman met with criminal leader Orlando Oliveira to plan the attack on Franco. Orlando Oliveira is under arrest. Franco was murdered along with her driver. Two members of the political movement Favela Front from Brazil say they will run on October's elections. the two Afro-Brazilian candidates are seeking a political voice to unify the voting power of favelas and other poor black neighborhoods. Filmmaker Anderson Kwak will run for a seat in Congress, while rapper Nega Giza is seeking a place in the State Council of Rio de Janeiro. The candidates say they want to preserve the legacy of Councilwoman Marielle Franco, who was murdered in March.
The idea of the Favela Front of Brazil isn't about legislating for a single race, isn't about legislating for certain people, isn't about legislating for favelas. It is to counterbalance the power held by few people who make decisions about our lives in the country. It is to achieve a balance that we don't have right now.
I believe there's clearly a lot of demand for this kind of representation in politics. I hope new leaders emerge to bring attention to this kind of problem, to this question, so that it's just an isolated issue. What's worse, some new representatives are intimidated by violence. I hope violence loses the fight.
Brazil's Supreme Court has voted against allowing former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva to be freed from the police headquarters in Curitiba. Lula had been detained there since April after being sentenced to 12 years in prison for alleged money laundering. However, Lula is still running for office in October's presidential election and is leading in the polls. He maintains his innocence.
30 days has passed since the fateful moment when Lula da Silva was imprisoned, but also 30 days since the workers' resistance to prevent his detention began. The streets of São Bernardo do Campo have witnessed, once again, demonstration of the people demanding the freedom of the person who began his political career there before he became president.
Lula livre! Lula livre!
The corrupt rats of Brazil should be in jail, not Lula. The people will free Lula. He is our president and he will be president again.
For 30 days, the Workers' Party has had its headquarters at the camp, near the place where Lula is. Gleisi Hoffman visited the political leader and reported back on the problems that he told her about.
This is why they ousted Dilma. This is why they imprisoned Lula, to have now 13 million unemployed, while we created 20 million formal jobs.
The hope of the demonstrators is that the ministers of the Supreme Federal Court will decide that Judge Sergio Moro didn't take into account all evidence when ordering Lula's detention.
They took our president away. They imprisoned Lula, but they don't have any proof against him. They're all made up.
The absence of mainstream media covering the protest camp for Lula's freedom makes international solidarity essential. With that goal, Dilma Rousseff is on a tour of Europe. There is also a Mercosur Parliamentary Commission that will visit him.
Lula is the symbol of internationalism. It's the symbol of that still there is a hope that together we can create a better Latin America, but also like a better world. Because he is the first person in Brazil to actually try to change the structural injustice.
Many days have passed and the court is taking a long time, and there are no signs of his imminent freedom. The workers' camp around the prison and marches in the main cities are united. They know something must happen, and it is likely to be something big and on the streets.
Thousands in Argentina gather outside Congress to protest against President Mauricio Macri's economic policies. Demonstrators rejected Macri's decision to seek funding from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. They say the intervention of the institution will bring more austerity to the Argentinian people. Protesters also called for an end to the increase in public services charges. Meanwhile, following these protests, the Argentinian Congress decided to stop increases to gas and electricity charges brought in by Macri's government. Opposition groups want the tariffs lowered to 2017 rates. Under a new bill, gas and electricity rates will only increase when salaries rise. For small and medium-sized businesses, utility rates will go up in line with wholesale prices. The bill will now be discussed in the Senate. In Ecuador, 4 members from the community of Rio Blanco were detained on Wednesday night after they clashed with police. The indigenous community was protesting against a mining project inside their territory, south of the country. The Ministry of Mining said the community tried to enter the project and damaged the facilities. On their part, the Confederation of Indigenous Communities has denounced the mining project and the damage it is causing to the community and the environment. They ask the government to stop persecuting social leaders and environmental defenders. In Peru, the remains of 23 people who disappeared between 1980 and 2000 have been handed back to their relatives. The International Committee of the Red Cross and the Peruvian Prosecutor's Office handed back the bodies, which were found in mass graves at a ceremony in the Andean city of Huanta. The number of disappeared from the dictatorship period is estimated to be around 20,000.
My mother and father left me when I was 11 years old. The Shining Path murdered them one night. They came into my home and took my father, my mother, and my brother out of the house.
After searching for so long, after so much suffering, now to see the remains of my husband with my own eyes, I feel more at peace.
Chilean students have returned to the streets, and yet again they were violently repressed by police.
They wanted to march on Santiago's Central Avenue, La Alameda, but they've been told they cannot, so they changed the route.
We hope that this mobilization will be peaceful, despite all the attempts that the police and government have made to stop it. We hope that the police will not retaliate against us, and we say to Sebastián Piñera, it is obvious that you did not learn anything from the protest of 2011. It is much easier to mobilize with permission than without it.
The students have called for civil disobedience and have gathered in the traditional Plaza of Heroes with the support of parents and supporters.
It seems like the police don't recognize free will, and now they are lashing out increasingly at secondary school students because they are going to march by themselves, which is to say that not one sector of the population has the right to march on La Alameda. Is it because they are underage students?
It's a protest that follows the historical demands of Chilean students. They are calling for sex education, and one which isn't sexist. They say that the current education causes gender violence and HIV.
Our primary demand is the issue of non-sexist education and sexual education during secondary school and university. We see companions who are mobilizing within universities with this demand because they see gender violence within their respective establishments.
Students were caught in violence today, outside of the classrooms this time. The students were hit with water cannons and tear gas from moving vehicles. Any attempt to demonstrate was stifled. Students, for the most part underage, were subject to identity control for just walking and resting. Chilean democracy allegedly allows freedom of association, but always under the watchful eyes of the Chilean military police.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is in Chile on the second leg of his Latin American tour. Abbas met with Chilean President Sebastián Piñera as part of his 4-day trip to the country. The two discussed the strengthening of ties between the two nations in different areas such as trade. Piñera also ratified his country's support to the two-state solution and pointed out that this is the only way to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the ECLAC, now in its third day in Cuba, has debated the relations between Latin America and the Caribbean. The debate focused on engaging projects, growth opportunities, and social actions. Representatives are also presenting a new development plan for the region. The meeting is 10 to end on Friday. With elections set in 2 weeks in Barbados, political parties have presented their list of candidates. On Wednesday, ruling Democratic Labour Party presented a progress report of its past 5 years in power, highlighting progress in education, sports, youth and economic development. The ruling DLP and the opposition Barbados Labour Party have both presented 30 candidates. This year's election has attracted a record number of parties and candidates, with a total of 132 candidates for 30 seats in the House of Assembly. Around 40% of the candidates are women. We'll take one last short break. but join us after another video from our multimedia colleagues.
Hace minutos hablé con Christine Lagarde, su directora, y nos confirmó que vamos a arrancar hoy mismo a trabajar en un acuerdo.
Welcome back. The Israeli army says it struck around 20 Iranian military facilities in the Golan Heights in Syria. The raids were one of the largest Israeli military operations in recent years and the biggest assault on Iranian targets. Syrian state media Sana said Syrian air defenses intercepted and shot down some of the Israeli missiles. In recent months, Israel has carried out a number of strikes on Iranian facilities in Syria. In April, they attacked an airbase, killing 7 Iranian troops. The airstrike comes just a day after President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the international nuclear deal with Tehran. It's been 7 decades since the creation of Israel, marking forced mass displacements of Palestinians from their homeland. A 1947 United Nations resolution had called for the partitioning of Palestine between Arabs and Jews. The decision made more than 700,000 Palestinians homeless. Today, over 5 million Palestinian refugees spread across Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Gaza, and the West Bank. Palestinians still dream to return to their native land, and it's been 6 weeks since they launched the Great March of Return. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has hosted his Chinese counterpart Li Keqiang and South Korean President Moon Jae-in in Tokyo for a 3-day summit. The meeting is in preparation for another summit between the US and North Korea. It is the first time a Chinese premier has visited Japan in 8 years. The main focus of the trilateral meeting is to push for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. The 3 leaders want to make sure they are not left out without a deal between Washington and Pyongyang, it's saying. We come to the end of this news brief, but this and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.